I picked up his phone by habit, thinking it was mine. The screen lit up with a new notification, just a glimpse, but enough. A woman, barely dressed. My stomach twisted. This wasn't some stranger's photo. It was taken in our bedroom. This is a story of betrayal, the lies we don't see coming, and the power of knowing when to walk away. Before we get into the story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I used to believe in fairy tales. Or at least, in my version of one. I met Daniel when I was 24. He was charming, the kind of man who could make a whole room laugh without trying too hard. I was drawn to him from the start, and when he pursued me, I felt like the luckiest girl in the world. We spent hours talking about everything, our dreams, our childhoods, the kind of life we wanted to build. And for a while, we did build it. We moved in together after 2 years, got married 4 years later, and for 6 years after that, I thought we had something real. He had his quirks, I mean, who doesn't? But I loved him. I worked as an interior designer, balancing projects and clients, while he was an IT consultant, a job that started sending him on more and more business trips. I convinced myself that was normal. That marriage had phases. Some months, we were in sync, finishing each other's sentences, sneaking kisses in the kitchen. Other times, we felt more like polite roommates. But I always believed we'd find our way back to each other. That's why, when he started pulling away, I refused to see it for what it was. It started small. Missed dinners. Phone calls taken in the other room. More time spent scrolling through his phone, his back turned toward me. I chalked it up to stress. His job had been demanding lately. And honestly, I thought maybe I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't doing enough to keep things exciting. So I tried. One night, I planned a date. I made his favorite meal, set the table with candles, even wore the dress he once told me made me look like the woman of his dreams. When he walked in, he barely looked at me. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, sitting down and scrolling through his phone. I forced a smile. I wanted to. He barely ate, barely spoke. And when I reached across the table to take his hand, he pulled away. That night, I slipped into bed beside him, pressing against his back. "I miss you," I whispered. He sighed, shifting away. "I'm just tired, Lauren." I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my heart sinking. The next morning, he left early for work. I told myself it was fine. Every marriage had rough patches. I just had to try harder. So, I threw myself into planning our upcoming anniversary. I had no idea I was planning something for a man who had already checked out. I should have known something was wrong. The signs were there. But when you love someone, you don't want to see what's right in front of you. It started with his phone. Daniel had never been the kind of guy who cared much about privacy. We used to scroll through each other's playlists, send memes from each other's accounts. His phone would sit face up on the coffee table while we watched movies. But then, out of nowhere, things changed. One night, we were watching a show together. Well, I was watching while he sat beside me, glued to his phone. Every few minutes, his screen would light up, and he'd angle it away. At first, I ignored it. Maybe it was work. Maybe it was a friend. Then, his phone vibrated again. And this time, I caught it, the quick smirk. The kind that used to be just for me. I tried to play it cool. "What's so funny?" He locked his phone and stretched. "Nothing. Just something stupid from work." His voice was casual, but something about it felt off. I let it go. Or at least, I tried to. A few days later, I was folding laundry when I found a receipt in his jeans pocket. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But this one was from a restaurant I didn't recognize, one of those upscale places with dim lighting and overpriced cocktails. The date? 2 nights ago. The same night he told me he had to work late. I stood there, staring at it, my mind racing. There had to be an explanation. Maybe he went out with co-workers. Maybe it was a business dinner. Still, I felt uneasy. That night, when he got home, I casually asked, "How was work the other night?" He didn't even look up from his phone. "Busy." I hesitated, then held up the receipt. "You were busy at Del Frisco's?" His head snapped up. For a split second, I saw it, the flicker of panic in his eyes. But then just as quickly, he covered it up. Oh, he said, letting out a short laugh. Yeah, that was a client dinner. Last-minute thing. I studied his face. You didn't mention it. He shrugged. Didn't think it was important. Something about the way he said it, the ease, the confidence, made me feel like I was the one overreacting. I forced a smile and tossed the receipt in the trash. Okay. But that night, as I lay beside him in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers. A few days later, I was venting to my best friend Molly, over coffee. She stirred her latte, watching me carefully. Are you sure he's not seeing someone? I let out a laugh, too quick, too forced. No. Of course not. She didn't laugh. Lauren, the late nights, the phone thing, the receipt? It doesn't add up. I shook my head. Daniel wouldn't do that. Molly sighed. Okay. But if something was going on, would you even want to know? Her words stuck with me long after I left the cafe. That night, I tried again. I curled up next to Daniel on the couch, resting my head on his shoulder. We should plan a weekend away, I said softly. Just us. He stiffened. I don't know if I can take time off right now. I pulled back. Not even for one weekend? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Lauren, I'm exhausted. Can we not do this right now? A lump formed in my throat. I felt foolish. Needy. I forced myself to smile. Yeah, sure. But deep down I knew. Something was wrong. And I was finally ready to find out what. Doubt is a slow poison. It seeps in quietly, whispering in the back of your mind, turning every little thing into a sign. I didn't want to believe Daniel was cheating. I needed to believe that this was all in my head. But the more I paid attention, the harder it became to lie to myself. It wasn't just the late nights. Or the secretive phone habits. It was the way he looked at me, or didn't. The way he was present, but not there. One morning, I got up before him. His phone was on the nightstand, face down like always. I hesitated before reaching for it. I wasn't the kind of person who snooped. We had always trusted each other. But something in my gut was screaming at me. I pressed the home button. The screen lit up. Incorrect passcode. My breath caught. Daniel had changed it. For years, we used the same passcodes for everything. It wasn't about secrecy, it was just convenience. But now? Now I was locked out. I set the phone back down, my hands shaking. When Daniel got out of the shower, I tried to keep my voice light. Hey, did you change your phone password? He barely looked up as he pulled a shirt over his head. Yeah. IT stuff. Company policy. A lie. I knew it. I wanted to call him out, but what would I say? Hey, I think you're cheating, and your password change proves it? Instead, I swallowed my suspicions and forced a smile. Oh, makes sense. But it didn't. None of it did. The woman in his social media likes. A few nights later, I was scrolling through Instagram when I noticed something. Daniel wasn't a big social media guy. He posted maybe once a year, usually some generic Happy New Year message. But his likes? Those were a different story. I clicked on his profile, then on the posts he had liked. And there she was. Brianna. Her page was full of pictures, outfits in mirror selfies, rooftop cocktails, beach vacations. And scattered throughout her posts, buried between the likes from her girlfriends and random bots, was a familiar username. Daniel Mitchell, 91. My stomach turned. I clicked on one of her pictures, one from a few weeks ago. A dimly lit restaurant, a wine glass in her hand. The caption? Another perfect night. I checked the date. It was the same night I found that receipt. The unease inside me solidified into something real. Something undeniable. He wasn't just distant. He was somewhere else. With someone else. The confirmation I didn't want. Molly didn't say I told you so when I showed her Brianna's profile. She just sipped her iced coffee and said, "You need proof." I frowned. This isn't proof? She shook her head. It's suspicious. But if you confront him now, he'll gaslight you. He'll say she's just a coworker. That you're overreacting. You need something he can't deny. I hated that she was right. For days, I watched Daniel more closely. His habits. His reactions. I started paying attention to when he'd leave the room to take calls, when his texts made him smirk. And then one evening, my moment came. Daniel was in the kitchen, pouring himself a drink, when his laptop buzzed. He had left it open on the counter. I wasn't trying to snoop, but my eyes flickered to the screen. A message. From Brianna. I didn't mean to click it. I swear, I didn't. But my hand moved before my brain could stop me. The message preview was enough. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. The room spun. I stepped back, heart hammering. I heard Daniel's footsteps approaching, and I quickly moved away from the laptop. Everything okay? He asked, sipping his drink. I forced a smile. Yeah. Just thinking. He didn't notice the way my hands shook. He didn't notice the way I couldn't look at him. But in that moment, I saw him clearly for the first time in a long time. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was a stranger. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while Daniel slept soundly beside me, completely unaware that I knew. That I saw. I wanted to scream. To shove him awake and shove the laptop in his face. But I didn't. I kept hearing Molly's voice in my head. You need something he can't deny. So, I waited. Watching the man I thought I knew. Over the next few days, I forced myself to act normal. I still kissed him goodbye in the mornings. Still made casual conversation over dinner. Still sent texts asking how his day was going. But inside, I was watching. Studying him. And now that I knew, I saw it all so clearly. The way he checked his phone the second he thought I wasn't looking. The way he smiled down at his screen before tucking it away. The way he barely touched me anymore. I kept thinking about Brianna's message. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. Where had they gone? What had they done? How long had it been going on? Every time I thought about it, my stomach twisted. But I kept my face neutral. Kept my voice steady. Because if I was going to end this, I wanted to end it right. The moment I couldn't ignore. The final proof came on a Thursday night. Daniel had fallen asleep early, his phone buzzing on the nightstand. I hesitated. My heart pounded as I reached for it. My fingers were ice cold. I didn't even know what I was looking for, I just knew I needed to see. The screen lit up. A new message. From Brianna. And then a photo. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was a mirror selfie, Brianna, barely dressed, standing in our bedroom. Daniel's shirt draped over her shoulders. And in the background? Our bed. I stared at the screen, my pulse roaring in my ears. This wasn't a restaurant receipt. This wasn't a flirty message. This was my home. My life. And he had brought her here. The numbness before the storm. I didn't cry. Didn't scream. Didn't throw the phone against the wall like I wanted to. I just shut down. I placed the phone back on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. This was it. The end. Not just of our marriage. Not just of the trust one had once believed in. But the version of me that would have begged for an explanation. I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't going to fight for someone who had already replaced me. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of watching me break. I was done. The plan. The next morning, I got up before Daniel. I didn't say a word as I grabbed a bag from the closet and stuffed in some clothes. Didn't flinch as I walked past him on my way out the door. I wasn't running away. I was getting ready. By noon, I was sitting across from a divorce lawyer. By the end of the day, I had everything I needed. Proof. Documents. A plan. Daniel thought he was in control. Thought he had the upper hand. He had no idea what was coming. I didn't go home that night. I wasn't ready to sit across from Daniel at the dinner table and pretend I didn't know everything. Instead, I went to Molly's. She didn't ask questions when she opened the door and saw my face. Just stepped aside and let me in. We sat on her couch, a glass of wine in my hand, my divorce papers spread out on the coffee table. This is it, I said quietly, staring at the papers. I'm done. Molly leaned back, watching me carefully. You sure? I let out a breath. More than I've ever been about anything. And I was. There was no second guessing. No hesitation. Daniel had made his choices. Now, it was time for me to make mine. The confrontation. The next evening, I went home. Daniel was already there, sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up when I walked in. "Hey," he said casually. Like nothing was wrong. Like he hadn't destroyed everything we built. I stood in front of him, my heart pounding, but my face calm. "We need to talk." He finally glanced up, his brows pulling together. "About what?" I pulled out his phone from my pocket. His unlocked phone. I had waited until he was in the shower that morning. Waited until he left it unattended. And then, I had taken everything I needed. Screenshots. Messages. Photos. Proof. I held the phone out to him. "You left this open." His entire body stiffened. His face paled. Slowly, he reached for it, his fingers almost shaking. "Lauren, I cut him off. You think she's better?" My voice was steady. Cold. "Wait until you see what's coming." I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. The divorce papers. His eyes widened. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking?" He swallowed hard. "Lauren, listen. I messed up, okay? But we can work through this." I tilted my head, studying him. "Work through what?" He blinked. "You didn't forget our anniversary," I said. "You took her to dinner instead." Silence. "You didn't fall asleep at the office. You were with her." His jaw clenched. "And you didn't accidentally bring her into our bed, Daniel." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "You made a choice." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, he had nothing to say. And that's when I knew. Knew that I had won. Knew that I wasn't the weak, broken woman he thought I'd be. I was free. Walking away. I stood up, sliding the divorce papers onto the table. "My lawyer's expecting you to sign those by Friday." He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. I grabbed my bag, heading for the door. "Lauren." I stopped but didn't turn around. His voice was quieter now. "I didn't mean to hurt you." For a second, I almost laughed. Instead, I let out a breath. "That's the thing, Daniel. You didn't just hurt me." I turned to face him, my hand on the doorknob. "You lost me." And with that, I walked out. The power of knowing when to leave. I don't know what Daniel did after that. I don't know if he ran to Brianna or sat there in shock. And honestly, I don't care. Because for the first time in a long time, I put myself first. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about knowing your worth. About walking away when someone no longer deserves you. And about the power of saying enough.